Welcome to today's webinar, Designing Scale-out Object Storage Solutions for Veeam. I'm Lauren Grobe, Head of Marketing for OSNexus, and I will be your host for today. We're going to start with a presentation and then go into some demos so you can see how easy it is to set up Veeam and OSNexus QuantaStor. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our two presenters. First, we have Steve Fermes, Solution Architect at Veeam. Steve advises Veeam customers and partners on how to build and implement strategic solutions on a complex scale. Some of his focuses include virtualization, storage, and multi-cloud infrastructures. Next, we have Stephen Umbehocker, the OSNexus founder and CEO. Steve's an enterprise storage industry veteran, having worked in this space for over 20 years and holds over 20 patents in storage technologies. We will be answering questions during the demo, so if you have any questions during the presentation, please submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We are going to jump in now, so with that, here is Steve Fermes from Veeam.
Thanks, Lauren. So today we're going to talk about backing up objects to OSNexus. To start with this, so Veeam has what we call our cloud data management platform. And what this does is you go around the clock, we have our, cloud mobility, which again, pretty much anything that's S3 compliant, we can work with. We have monitoring and analytics, which allows us to go through and certainly keep track of, what you're backing up, how the backups are performing, as well as growth and future statistics. Next, we have our orchestration and automation. What that does is allows us to set up plans so that automate DR recovery, for instance. We can do VM replication from point to point. So a lot of the Veeam day-to-day tasks can be done automatically through this process. Governance and compliance, which, part of our discussion today, going through and, let's say you need to have your data always available. We can go through and make sure that it meets all of your regulatory requirements that you may have in your environment. And certainly last but not least is the core of the Veeam architecture is the backup and recovery, right? This is taking that data, protecting it, making sure that when you need to use it for recovery and or for any sort of analytics, it is there and available to you.
Oh, one more sec. There we go. There you go, Steve.
So the Steve and Steve show. So we have on the left, obviously Veeam running, whether it be virtual or physical. Then we have what we call, our Scale-out Backup Repository. So what that does is it's basically a software-defined repository, meaning that we can have multiple repositories. In this case, multiple QuantaStors stacked up inside this SOBR in the performance tier. And by its name, performance tier, it is high performance. So when you do your backups, the backups will complete rapidly, as well as when you need to do those restores, you'll get your restoration back as fast as possible. And what's great about the SOBR, combined with QuantaStor is as your backup needs increase, as your data grows, which everyone's data is growing exponentially, as your performance tier grows, and you can just add new QuantaStors into your or nodes into your infrastructure and just add them into the performance tier as an extent. And the great thing about the OSNexus QuantaStor is it's Veeam ready, right? So it went through and passed all of the Veeam ready repository tests. So there were certain benchmark performance tests that if you were to do a backup or a restore from your OSNexus and you had poor performance, when you contacted Veeam support, we would know based on the fact that this product is Veeam ready repository qualified that there's something wrong, right? It's not just a slow, platform. Something's wrong because we know that this product did pass those tests. So they, it gives them that extra knowledge that they can start digging deeper, and it's not just a slow, product. Now within that SOBR, we have our capacity tier, which is the object storage target. Now, again, the OSNexus QuantaStor is Veeam ready qualified for object with immutability. the with immutability is key. When we came out with object storage capabilities back in 9.5.4, which was January of 2018, we didn't have the immutability, right? In 2019, we came up with it with version 10. And what that does is we use the S3 APIs for object locking. And what that does is when you write an object to the OSNexus QuantaStor, it'll be locked for a defined period of time that you define within Veeam. And what that means is the object cannot be changed, it cannot be deleted, nothing can be done to that object until the object lock date has been reached. So what that does is that protects you from ransomware attacks. It will protect you from a rogue employee, getting into the Veeam interface and trying to, hey, I'm leaving today. Before I go, I'm going to wipe out all the backups and then delete the production data. If for some reason they would delete the production data, they cannot delete the backup within Veeam because it's immutable. So when you go into Veeam, you say, hey, delete this backup job, it's going to come back and say, can't do it, it's locked. So what this does is this will give you your end-to-end protection and ensure you that when you need your data, it'll always be available.
That's really key for a lot of compliance standards as well, being able to have that immutability, because some of the different FINRA and other government compliance standards require that.
Yeah, good point. Yes, absolutely. And some examples we had was, there are some industries where their insurance companies will not underwrite them unless they can prove that they have an immutable copy of their data. So it's a huge thing.
Nice. And this slide, we're just going to talk a little bit about another way that you can set up the Scale-out Backup Repository with QuantaStor. Because you can use QuantaStor for both the performance tier and the capacity tier, you can actually set up a scale-out cluster that does both for you at the same time. So you can have a small scale-out all-flash NAS using a group of SSD drives that you put into the cluster, and then you can use the platter combined with some SSD to do your object storage all within the same cluster at the same time. So that's a great way to reduce costs on your performance tier. It is nicer to go separate out the performance tier so that you've got like the extra redundancy that comes with a complete separate config for the performance and capacity tier. But this is a great way to be able to do that in a lower cost way to implement SOBR, depending on what your data center footprint needs are and other requirements. So yeah, that's actually a great segue right into the video. So what we've got in the video is we're going to go through setting up a QuantaStor cluster, essentially what you see on the screen here. And then we're going to go through setting up a performance tier repository, capacity tier repository, and then the SOBR repository within the video. We've actually got those configurations set up. So if we have some questions, we can jump right over to the actual config. And we're going to just talk to the video as it goes through. Right, I pre-recorded the video just so we'd save a little bit of time. The cluster setup has a couple of stages that take a few minutes, and didn't want to pause the whole presentation for that. So we kind of are able to fast forward with the video. So without further ado, let me bring up the video and we'll kick that off and we can do some commentary as it goes. All right. So the first part of this, I've just logged into a QuantaStor 4-node cluster that we have set up for the demo. And this is, I'm using 4 virtual machines here for the demo. And QuantaStor is available for download from our website. You can just go to osnexus.com and click the Try Now button, and you can get license keys to try out QuantaStor with Veeam. And you can download it as, you can download the ISO image and put it on bare metal hardware or as onto virtual machines like I have here. What we're jumping into first here is we're creating the scale-out cluster. So we've got our 4-node config. I'm going into the advanced settings to set the domain suffix for the cluster. And the scale-out cluster is what we're going to go create our object storage pool in. This is the time to choose encryption and compression if you're going to turn those on the QuantaStor side. You can also, of course, have the encryption and compression on the Veeam side, which is the more common route. So I left those unchecked. And here we're going into selecting which network ports we want to use for our QuantaStor scale-out cluster. We've started doing more of these clusters with a single network. With like 100 gigabit Ethernet, you can just bond a pair of ports together and you have plenty of bandwidth for both the backend network and the front end network, all on a single network. And it's just simpler to set up. So we've started doing that more often. And here, that's exactly how I'm setting up this cluster. I've got the same network for the client interface on the front and the backend interface on the back. Client interface, sometimes you'll hear that referred to as like a north-south interface, and the backend, a lot of times referred to as the east-west. All right, so now we've got our cluster created. What we're waiting on here is the monitors to all get created. So QuantaStor, if you look at the taskbar at the bottom, it's still running the cluster setup. It goes and creates a monitor, which is sort of the traffic cop for all the services and data devices on the within the cluster. And it takes a couple of minutes for it to finish that. This is part of why I kind of pre-recorded this. I didn't want you guys to have to wait a couple of minutes while these monitors are all getting initialized. So once we got the cluster created, now we're going to jump right into throwing all the data devices into the cluster. And essentially, we're going to do two steps here. We're going to select all of these devices that are 104 gigabytes and select those for use as our journal. And then we're going to take all the rest of the devices and we're going to use those as our data devices. These are small devices because I've got a virtual machine set up for the demo. In practice, you'd typically be using 14 terabyte drives as the data devices, and then like 1.92 terabyte SSDs on in there for the journal groups. And QuantaStor is going to automatically mirror all the journal groups. So each pair of devices is going to be grouped together as a RAID 1. That's important so that if you lose an SSD, that it doesn't have to rebuild all the OSDs on that particular node. You can just replace the bad OSD, and the rebuild of the journal happens within the box really easily and quickly. So here I'm just showing that it's going to be mirroring those together. And here we're going to select all these devices. All of these data devices that we've selected, they're each going to get a little slice of the SSDs, the mirrored SSD journal, what we call a journal group. And the slices it's going to create is a 2 gigabyte chunk for the write log and a 60 gigabyte chunk for the metadata offload. Now, in this case, I've got 4 OSDs. You can see there's 4 data devices per node. And so those would be 4 times 60. So we need 240 gigabytes of space. I've got some smaller devices for this demo. So before we close the screen out, I go and I switch that metadata offload device size to just 3 gigabytes so that it'll all fit within the available space. One other thing to note, if you're doing an all flash configuration, you would just not create journal devices at all. You just push all the flash in onto this screen right here for the data OSD devices, and you'd be done. No external journal group devices are only needed when you're building a hybrid configuration using hard drives. And that's the most common way that object storage repositories are set up. You've got some flash and mostly hard drives to keep the costs down. At the end of the presentation, we're going to jump to the design utility and go over how to go design QuantaStor clusters using our web design app. So we can show you a little bit more on the number of SSDs that should be selected based off the number of hard drives and all of that. So now we've added all the data devices. So we've done the first 2 big steps. Those are the ones that really take the most amount of time, creating the cluster, then adding the devices. Once you've clicked OK on that dialog that just closed out, it takes a couple of minutes for all of this to appear with all the different OSDs and journal groups that the QuantaStor cluster is orchestrating. But once you see it says normal exists up, now we're ready to go create the object storage zone or object storage pool, as we kind of refer to it interchangeably. And at this stage, we're going to actually choose the level of erasure coding. I have 4 nodes, and so we're going to use 2+2 erasure coding. You always want to have at least 2 coding chunks in all cases. You never want to do a deployment with a single coding chunk. It's just not, it's not recommended. And 2 + 2 means that you've got 50% efficient storage. And so there's a benefit to having more nodes. If you have a 6-node cluster, then you could do a 4 + 2 erasure coding. Now you're at 66% efficiency. And so more nodes is better. So when you're planning out your storage cluster design, your object storage cluster design, think about getting more nodes. You'll get more performance and you get more erasure coding options. This getting started dialog is accessible in that upper right-hand corner, and it takes you through all 6 steps of setting up the cluster. I kind of let me jump back to that real quick here. So, and pause the video. So this in the upper right-hand corner, click that button and then choose Scale-out S3. And all 6 of these steps are basically what we're going through here in the video. We created the cluster already, and then we created all of our OSDs and journals here with step 2. And then we already kicked off creating the erasure coded 2 + 2 S3 zone or object storage pool. Those are all one-time steps. And in fact, this next step, which is to add the S3 gateways, which are the services that needs to run on every node to talk the S3 protocol, those are all one-time steps. So you'll go through these steps 1 through 4 one time, and then you can then create multiple users and buckets. And really, even those steps are kind of one-time steps. You're going to create a S3 user for the Veeam account, and then you're going to create an S3 bucket to drive your capacity tier. And so let me just keep the video going. Yeah, really straightforward. All of these steps you can get through in about 15 minutes. The video here, we're kind of going through it in all of maybe 5 minutes. And now we're on to the stage of creating all the S3 gateways. So every single QuantaStor node should be running an S3 gateway, because you can then load balance all of that S3 traffic across all those IPs. To do that, you'd get a load balancer into the mix. You could use Kemp or Big IP from F5, or even Nginx has some load balance capabilities where you could do some round robin with Veeam. In this demonstration, we're just going to point Veeam to the first node, the Rados gateway or the S3 gateway on the first node. And we're just creating those gateways. We've got 3 of them created, and now the 4th is being created. So now all the Rados gateways are all set up and going. Now that we've got the whole cluster set up and it's ready to talk S3, we have to go and add a user account. So I just called this one Veeam admin to keep it simple. And really nothing special that needs to be done here. Just put in a username and click OK, and you've got a user account. This is an S3 user account, so it has automatically generated S3 keys for the account, and we'll grab those keys later on. Now we can start creating buckets. Here I'm creating one called Veeam Back Rep. Later on, I create one called Veeam Capacity, because this is going to be our capacity tier. And a little note on this. This estimated objects is a way to pre-size the index, basically the bucket index database, to make it a bit larger up front. Veeam, as Steve could talk to, it creates more objects than some other platforms. But I think 10 million is more than enough. Essentially, if you don't pre-shard, it's going to re-shard for you automatically. It doesn't have that big of a performance impact. You'll see it dip down for a couple of minutes if it's resharding during a backup. But here I'm going and setting it to pre-size to a little bit larger, to 10 million, to plan for 10 million objects to go into the bucket. And then the last thing to make sure to select is, if you're going to use the object locking feature that Steve was talking to earlier for the governance reasons, then choose enabled. You don't want to choose governance compliance on this side, because if you do that, then QuantaStor is going to be enforcing it, and it'll be fighting with Veeam, and you'll have some configuration problems. So just, if you're going to use object locking, set it to enabled. and then click OK. Let Veeam do the smarts regarding the time frame of and control of the object locking. So there's our bucket. And now we're going to do one more thing here. We've got everything ready now for our capacity tier. We now want to set up a performance tier using the same cluster, because we're going to show this as sort of a universal performance tier and capacity tier for SOBR within the same cluster for this demo. And so at this stage, I'm going through and I'm going to go create a scale-out file system. The first thing you need for a scale-out file system is you got to create what's called a metadata server. And so QuantaStor is popping up saying, hey, you haven't made a metadata server. Do you want to create those? And I just click yes, go ahead and create one. And it's going to put that metadata server. You can see that little icon with the little control tower got added. And we're going to put a metadata server on multiple boxes. And that's for redundancy. If we lose 2 nodes, we still want a metadata server to be up and running so we can still drive backups to the cluster. So we've got the second metadata server added. We're going to add a third one, and then we can create our scale-out file system. All right. Yeah, it takes a few seconds for some of these tasks to finish. And now we can go create the scale-out file system. And I just called this backup pool, keep it simple. And again, you want to use some type of erasure coding that is got at least 2 coding chunks. 2 coding chunks makes it so you can lose any 2 nodes with 0 downtime. And so that's a good way to go. And then the scaling factor, but that's about as sort of pre-planning for how much storage you plan to use for this particular pool. Now in a typical, if your configuration where you're going to do the performance pool and the object pool all in the same cluster, and you've got a couple hundred devices in there, maybe you'd set the performance pool to use scaling factor of 25%, and then the object pool would be scaling factor of 75%. You could also set them to 50-50. It really doesn't matter. All of that stuff dynamically adjusts as the data flows into the cluster, so they can be adjusted later on. So now we've got our scale-out file system. We're going to go create a folder, what we call a network share, in that scale-out file system next. Oh, one other note on this is the scale-out file system, when you first create it, it just uses all the available devices, and they're all, platter OSDs or platter devices that are SSD accelerated, but you might want it to just be on pure flash. And so you can right click there. What I was showing is you can just click on that, the data pool and the metadata pool, and set those to use an SSD rule so that they're all on pure flash. And then when you drive your backups via SOBR, it first goes into that performance tier that can be all flash, and then it'll dynamically move it from the flash tier, performance tier, to the capacity tier. So our capacity bucket has been created. Now we're creating the performance network share, our NAS storage. And the couple of steps that you do here when you're creating this share for Veeam, assign the storage to the Veeam admin account. And then I turned on Windows Extended ACLs. I don't even know if that was needed, but that's it. And just make sure you select the right pool. So we've got our scale-out pool, and click OK. And we've created our network share that we're going to use for our performance tier with Veeam. And that was the whole I'm just going to pause it there for a quick second. That was the whole setup of the entire QuantaStor cluster, and provisioning the bucket for the capacity tier, and provisioning the network share for the performance tier. So now we're on to the Veeam side. So this is where this part's going to go really quickly as well. It's really easy to set up Veeam, but this is the fun part. And so without further ado, let me just go ahead and get this, have this get going as well. And here we're going to create the performance repository first. And that is, we're going to use the SMB protocol to talk to that performance share that we just created on the QuantaStor side. And here we're giving it basically the SMB URL to it. We created and let me pause this real quick. We created a Veeam admin user account within QuantaStor, and I kind of skipped over that. There's inside of the QuantaStor UI. Let me bring up the QuantaStor UI real quick here so you can see. You want to go to the users and groups section and add a user account. And I had already done this, so I wanted to just call this out. So we created the S3 user account, and this is where the account that we'll be using to get our capacity tier set up. So this account has a secret key and an access key that we'll grab to set up the capacity tier. But for SMB access, we need another user account up here. And so you can just go up here and click add user account. And I had already done this, just didn't want that to be missed. So back to the video. We're creating that performance tier. I already put in the username and password for the Veeam admin user account. And that's kind of all there is to setting up the performance tier. It's showing, a small amount of capacity because this is pointing to some virtual machines for the cluster. And I just click next and next, and we got our performance tier set up. This takes a couple of seconds for Veeam to go and initialize the performance repository. And now we're going to go set up the object storage side. So same process. We're going to go to backup repositories and click add repository and choose object storage here and S3 compatible. And we're going to call this one V capacity because this is our capacity tier. And this service point, this is the URL to the port on the QuantaStor cluster that talks S3. And the best place to go get that URL is to go back to the QuantaStor UI. So we're going to jump back to that and go and get the URL from the panel here. So if you go to the S3 gateways, you can see that the S3, we set up an S3 gateway on every single one of the boxes. And here you can go click on the storage URL, say copy to clipboard, and then just come back here and paste that in. Now that we've got the service point, we need to get the credentials added in for the S3 user that we created. I had already done that, but you would just click add here and then put in that access key and secret key. But I had already put those in for those two, for that user account, which we created, which was the Veeam admin. But you can just get that information as well from the QuantaStor UI. You just go down to the S3 users rather than the management users and choose view user access keys. And then you can see all the keys that are on the Veeam admin account here. So click that show key text, and there you go. There's the access key and the secret key. This is the same as what you'd get with your account at Amazon. You'd have an access key and secret key. You can create multiple key pairs, and so later on you could remove those keys and create new ones. When you go to the next step, to go create this, it's going to say, hey, I don't recognize this certificate. And that's because QuantaStor creates a self-signed certificate within the cluster when you first set it up. You can change those out and put your own certificates in there later, but for the purposes of the demo, I'm just saying, okay, it's okay to use the self-signed keys. Now it's saying choose the bucket. This is saying the V capacity bucket because actually between a couple of stages of the video, I went back and created a bunch more buckets in there. So I'm choosing the V capacity bucket. It was set up the same way with the mutability turned on. Actually, let me go back a little bit and pause this real quick. So Steve, on this stage here, this is the whole bit where we need to turn on immutability, right?
Absolutely. That's where, by checking that box right there and setting the number of days, that's going to be the period that the objects will be locked and immutable. Correct.
Awesome. And you have to get that matched up with how you set up the bucket on the QuantaStor side. So if you said, I want object locking enabled on the bucket on the QuantaStor side, then you have to choose this here inside of Veeam, and vice versa. if you create a bucket with object locking disabled in QuantaStor, then on this side, you want to make sure to not check this box. So you just have to make sure that they're both matching end to end.
Correct. And Veeam's wizard will let you know if you didn't. So.
Yep. And within the bucket, you create a folder where you want the Veeam backups to go. I was super creative and called the folder Veeam, and that's kind of that bit. And now we've got the capacity tier repository set up. So we've got the two tiers, performance, capacity, and the next stage, we're going to go combine those together using the Scale-out repository. So there's the two, and now you go and choose the Scale-out repository on the left, and then say Add Scale-out repository by clicking that button in the upper left. And now I just called this SOBR for the Scale-out Backup Repository. And we're going to then choose the two repositories that we created in the previous step. First, we're going to pick our V performance. And then we're going to choose our V capacity. And well, let me jump back a little bit. So Steve, can you talk to this bit on the locality real quick? Let me stop it at that step. Of course, I blazed through that one so fast. Let me pause it when it gets there. Because that was really interesting around, you were saying that the data locality, that's kind of controlling on whether or not, there I paused it.
Correct. So this is where if you were to have, like in that example where you created one extent, you could have multiple extents, right? That's the idea of the SOBR, is it'll scale out. So what this does is when we do backups, if you pick data locality, we're going to keep the incremental backups with the full backup. So in that case, if you were to lose an extent, let's say, and that was the extent with the full backup, well, the incremental backups on other extents are kind of useless, right? So you can choose data locality to keep those together. Now, you can also choose performance. And what performance will do is it'll actually just spread the data across all of the extents and give you the optimum performance. And again, in cases with OSNexus with the erasure coding and all the redundancy within the nodes, performance is a great option in this environment.
Cool. And just out of curiosity, how often by default, does Veeam do a full backup? Does it do like a new full backup once a month or something like that? Or is it all synthetic?
It's strictly, yeah, I mean, it's strictly up to, what the demands of the customer are. Typically, you can do synthetic. We also have forever forward incremental, which never does, never does a full backup. It just goes on and just does incrementals forever. So it really depends on the use cases of what the customer is looking to achieve with the data protection strategy.
Okay. So, and if they do the data locality route, then, and they get a whole new extent added, like we set up the V performance extent, they could do a V performance 2 with another QuantaStor box. And then if they started doing some new full backups, then it would start using and balancing it across the second one. Yeah.
Correct.
And then the next step here is, so we already chose the V performance tier. Now we're choosing the V capacity tier. I thought this was really cool. Steve, can you talk to a little bit how you can choose that option here about copying the backups automatically right when they arrive?
Sure. So as you can see, we have two options, right? Copy and move. Copy, as it implies, is as soon as the backup file is created and closed on the performance tier, we will immediately start copying it to the capacity tier. So what this does is it gives you the protection. So let's say your backup jobs take 10 hours, 12 hours to run. You don't have to wait that full 12-hour window, right? So as soon as backup job 1 is done, it will immediately start copying its files to the object storage. Now the move can be moved in conjunction with the copy. What the move does is, you can see in the box here, it says 14 days. So what you could do is you could keep, let's say, you want to keep 14 days of backups on your high-speed flash disk. You would then choose this move, and what it would do is it would, let's say your retention policy was 60 days. You would have 60 days worth of backup data in your object storage capacity tier, but you would only have 14 days in your costly, flash disk. So it gives you the benefit of both worlds. And what Steve's showing is the override. You also have a little failover mechanism that if your performance tier, in this case, reaches 90%, we're just going to start moving the oldest backup files to the capacity tier to make sure that your performance tier does not run out of capacity and cause issues with your backups.
I think that's super cool. So then you can have this, you don't have to worry if you missize the performance tier. So if you set up an all flash configuration with like 30 terabytes for your performance tier, but it's filling up too soon because you got more backups than you expected, Veeam's is going to take care of it. I think that override is such a cool feature too.
Yeah, it helps protect your environment.
Yeah. And this is the live config. I'm just going to go back to the video and let it wrap up that this last couple of steps here. And that encryption option there, do you just click the button and then give it a password, and then that's kind of all there is to turning on the encryption?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So if you want to, you can also, when you create your backup job within the, going through the initial steps, you could choose backup there as well. So that way it would be encrypted on your performance tier. And when you check this, it will encrypt the data when it goes to the capacity tier.
Very cool. And that's all there is to setting up the Scale-out Backup Repository. We combine the performance tier and the capacity tier together. And in this presentation, that we're using the same QuantaStor cluster. We've got a Scale-out NAS pool set up within the cluster for the performance tier, and we've got a Scale-out object for the capacity tier. And so that's it. I didn't run backups, but this is the stage where you just start running backups. You point your backups to the SOBR, the SOBR repository that we created, and it's going to just start doing the auto tiering to move the data between the performance and capacity tiers for you. It's just such a cool technology. And with that, I wanted to go through a little bit on how we go about designing QuantaStor clusters. So this last part of the webinar, we're going to just go to the OSNexus website. There's a couple of links here if you want to go to the QuantaStor website and try out the web design tool with me. You can just go to link.osnexus.com/Veeam2PB to see a 2 petabyte config, or Veeam 600 terabyte for the 600 terabyte config. And I just want to talk to just some general design guidelines when you're designing an object store for Veeam. First, you want at least 4 servers, and that's because the erasure coding layout determines the minimum number of servers. So if you want to do a 2+2 erasure coding, which is kind of the smallest size erasure coding we recommend, you're going to need 2+2 servers. So in this case, 4. Better is to have 6 or more servers, and that's because then you can get much more efficient with the capacity. 2+2 is only 50% usable capacity, and then you have to reserve about 5 to 10% for rebalancing and to make sure that you don't go over. And with 4+2, you get 66% efficient, so you get an extra 16% capacity. So it's better to have more nodes if you can. And then the other thing to keep in mind is the number of SSDs that you'll want to add to the configuration. And in general, you'll want 2 SSDs for every 15 to 20 hard drives. So if you have a 60-bay unit, like we're showing in the diagram on the right, those are Western Digital 60-bay servers. You would want somewhere in the neighborhood of around 6 SSDs, 2 SSDs for every 20 drives, or you could do 2 SSDs for every 15 drives and put 8 SSDs in there. So you'd want 6 to 8 SSDs in there, and those are going to be used to offload all the metadata for the data devices onto all flash, as well as have the write log on all flash. So that gives you really great object storage performance as you're ingesting all this data from Veeam. And then added to that, you want one more SSD per server, and that's to dedicate an SSD for what's called the bucket index pool. And this is all the metadata for the object buckets. And putting that onto all flash is really great. Makes it so that as your environment scales and your so as your environment scales, that it's going to be able to rebalance the metadata for that bucket really efficiently. And I'm showing a config here with 4 nodes. QuantaStor will scale to tens of petabytes. So whatever scale that you need to take your Veeam backup environment to, QuantaStor is going to be able to take care of you there. And that's one of the great things too with the SOBR architecture, is that your object storage can just keep expanding, but you can also expand on the performance side by adding more extents, like Steve was getting to earlier. And the last bit here is in terms of the RAM, you want about 64 gigs of RAM per server, plus about 4 gigs of RAM per OSD. And one of the cool things about the design utility, and we'll jump to that right now, is that it does all that math for you. So here's the, here we are in the design utility. The way this works is you just input and the way you get to the design utility is right up here, support solution design tools. You input the amount of usable capacity that you need for your cluster. I'll put in like a petabyte. And then you choose the hardware that you want to use for your cluster. And we've certified QuantaStor on a wide selection of different servers from different major vendors. So Western Digital, Intel, Cisco, Supermicro, Dell. So whoever you're getting your servers from, you'll be able to use those with QuantaStor. And here we've selected these high density units from Western Digital, which are really great for archive use cases. And then you choose the data device size. There's 18 terabyte drives out right now, and so you can use some of the larger capacity drives. And for this, we were talking about having a pair of SSDs for every 15 to 20 hard drives. So we're going to have 6 of these SSDs per node for doing the making each of the hard drives into kind of a hybrid mode, where their write log is going to be offloaded to that flash, as well as their metadata is going to be on all flash. And then we add one more SSD to offload the bucket index pool. So we need one SSD per box for that. And that's kind of the basics of doing a design. You just put in your usable capacity, choose the hardware platform you want and the hard drives, and then make sure to choose the right number of metadata devices. Down here, you get into some of the settings on erasure coding and all of that. If you increase this to like a 4+2, then it's going to increase the number of servers because the erasure coding also dictates the minimum server count. And this is fixed. When you choose a particular erasure coding type for a given configuration, it's going to stay with that. So you want to plan ahead. If you want to go more efficient, start more efficient with 4+2 because it'll be stuck that way. Data compression, you're going to be getting all that from the Veeam side, and so I'm just setting that to 0 here. And the reserved free space, this is the space at which it's going to start giving call home alerts out of the QuantaStor cluster saying, hey, you need to go add more space because I'm losing, I'm getting low on capacity. And that's kind of it to designing the whole configurations. Welcome you guys to check that out on our website. And if you have any questions, just email us at info@osnexus.com. We'd be happy to help you with designing your scale-out cluster for Veeam. And that's it. These are some nice little resources. On the QuantaStor website, if you go to wiki.osnexus.com, we have a whole deployment guide, and all these slides are going to be available online after this presentation. And Lauren, were there any Q&A questions that looks like we
Doesn't look like any questions came in, but yes, like Steve said, just submit them to our website if you have anything. And thank you to Steve and Steve for presenting. And look for this webinar to be posted on the OSNexus YouTube channel.
Awesome.
So
Thanks, Steve.
thank
And
you
thanks,
all.
Lauren.
Thank you.
Yep,
Thanks,
thanks.
folks.